Okay, today we are going to start talking about the science fair. We're actually going to start with our procedure. So in our journals, we started at the beginning and we went through our table of contents. We've gone through everything all the way down to our procedure. Our last class, we talked about making our hypothesis. So this week we talked about procedure. I actually covered this entire section together. And the reason why is it's like going down a water slide. And when you start with one, you really just go through all of them. So even though they've got 3 to 4 weeks in the guide to get them all done, I kind of try to cover them at one time simply because they're so closely related. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to flip it open. Here's our background research on paper towels. And then we made our hypothesis that Bounty paper towels are more absorbent than other brands of paper towels. I like to skip pages because if we need to go back or we change our experiment, I want to have some breathing space to do that. Then we go into our procedure. Now, one of the big questions that's come up has been, how do you write your procedure before you come up with your experiment? Can't I do the experiment and then write the procedure down? And the answer is no. So the reason why is if you do your experiment, you unknowingly might be adding in some variables that you haven't considered. The reason we write our procedure ahead of time is so that we can think through our variables. Now, I will be honest and tell you that I do a rough draft before I put it in my lab journal because it makes me sit down and ask questions. And I went through this process with my kids today because I want them to really think through this process. Like, here's the first one. We talked about this. We fill a beaker with 100 milliliters of tap water. So if you're just doing your experiment, you're probably like, oh, I'm going to fill a beaker up with water. And so we talked about how, what fill to one person might be different to another. Do you fill it to the top? Well, then can you get your paper towel in it? Is water spilling over? Well, then is it an accurate measure anymore? So we just talked about why we need to be specific. Writing our procedure out helps us to think about the specifics of what our experiment is taking into consideration. So I had actually written up my procedure before I went to class. And in class today, as we're going through it, the kids actually came up with some great ideas and some thoughts, which caused us to go back and add a few things in. Like one of the things we talked about was I had to go back and with our paper towels, not every sheet of paper towels is the same. So I had to measure it. And I know that if I use, with my paper towels down here, if I use the like your pick your size paper towels, the majority of them, of the smallest, are the same size. However, they weren't all the pick a size paper towels. And so I went ahead, I had to measure it out and I had to figure out, okay, let's use a 12 by 11 sheet of paper towel. So we did this and we talked about folding it and about how I really needed to be specific because in our background research, one of the things we found out is the layers of paper towel create more absorbency. Now, is that true when you fold a paper? Is a folded paper towel more absorbent than a paper towel that's laid out flat? That's a whole nother experiment. But we don't know. So because that is a variable we don't know, we wanted to make sure they were all folded the correct way. So we actually walked through the steps of folding it. Now, what one of my kids said was, well, wait a minute, we need to add in that you have to, the resin side is together. I know if you have not done the in-depth research of paper towels that we have, you have no idea what that means. So the resin side of the paper towel is actually the back of the paper towel. So on my paper towel roll, when you have your paper towel, this inside part is the back of the paper towel, the part that's closest to the roll. And this is the side that's got the glue that holds it together. And the resin actually is part of what creates the absorbency of a paper towel. So because of that, she said, the resin side needs to be together so it's most absorbent. I thought that was a fabulous observation based upon the background research. So we added in a note that the resin side had to be together and that it's the inwards, it's the back part of the paper towel. So we kept on going. We did all of our different things about paper towels. We had to make sure that we talked about how you release it. We had to make sure we knew exactly how long it was being submerged, how long were we going to let water drip off of it, and then how we are going to get the water from the paper towel into our cylinder so that we can measure it, and then that we had to repeat the steps several times so that every paper towel was tested 5 times. So as we went through this, my procedure, I was able to get this on 2 pages because it's a fairly easy process to go through. Our experiment is not a difficult experiment. However, I will say that like my daughter a couple years ago, when she did her experiment, let me grab her book. Her experiment is much more in depth because she was doing it with Petri dishes. So she had to go through, figure out how she was going to label her Petri dishes. She had to actually make some germy water. And so she had to really write that out. Last year, my class, we did the potato chip experiment about what's the greasiest potato chip. And man, I'll tell you what, I had no idea the procedures were going to be so intense. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes as you start doing your experiment, you realize you've made a mistake in your procedure. At that point in time, you go back. So when we started our experiment, we were writing it out. We were going to test 0.5 ounce of chips. Well, we realized that's actually too big of a mound for us to do for our test. So we had to change it and we went back to 0.2. And then we realized, okay, we needed to add a few other, we dated it when we changed it. We had to go back in, we had to add a few other things. So it's okay to go back and change your procedure during your experiment. Just date it and write in the changes that you make. However, your procedure is what is helping you make sure that you are taking into account every possible variable. If you do not write it out, you are not going to take into account variables. So please write your procedure before you start working on your actual experiment. Now, once your procedure is written, the next step is your materials list. Why does your material list come after your procedure? Because sometimes you are going to forget a material. But if you write out your procedures, you will know exactly what it is you need. So for example, with my daughters, again, I'm going to go back to her material list. Her material list, she was testing what is the base cleaner would be best for a non-toxic household cleaner. So in her, she had her materials. She changed it up at some point. And then we had to go back in and she had to add. We realized she was growing too many spores in her Petri dishes. We could not visually count them. So she had to go back in and she had to add something else to her materials, which was that she had to add a cell phone and the specific app that you could take a picture of a Petri dish and it would count your spores. Now, not only did she have to add it there, but then she also had to go back. She had to add it to her bibliography page. She had to add it to the procedures. So in her procedures, she had to go back and add that she was going to use the BactLab app to count the colonies of the molds or the spores that were growing. So just know your materials next. Think of it through every possible thing. Like I'm going to need to cut one of the paper towels because they're not a standard size. I need scissors. I'm going to be putting this into my notebook. I need my notebook and my pen. I might need a towel for cleaning up a spill. I need 5 of every one of my paper towels ready to go. So everything you could possibly need will be in your materials. Don't forget to date every entry. Now, after your materials, you're going into risk and safety. So if you look up here, you've got your materials list, procedures, materials, risk and safety. So what is risk and safety? Risk and safety is when you try to take into account any possible potential risk and any safety precaution you need. All right, y'all, we're testing paper towels, the absorbency. I mean, seriously, what kind of risk and safety can I need? What I say is you can always think of one. For example, my first one, anytime you're working with water, make sure your work area is clear of materials that could be damaged by a water spill. We're working our beakers or glass. So we talked in class about, well, when you're doing glass beakers, you need to make sure there's no cracks or chips. You need to handle it carefully. I have to cut the paper towels, which means I'm using scissors. So I need to talk about scissor safety. And then in class, somebody came up with, they're like, oh, wait a minute. There's plastic wrap on your paper towels. You got to make sure nobody suffocates. So we put in there, discard plastic wrap carefully to avoid suffocation. There is always a risk in safety, at least one that you can put in for each project that you do. So just think about every possible thing. If you're working in the kitchen, it's going to be handling maybe heat or knives. If you're doing batteries, you want to make sure you know what the proper battery disposal is. If you are working with anything that involves a dangerous substance, you're going to want to know that as well. Once again, for my daughters, for risk and safety, hers was a little more complicated because she actually was doing some specific things like alcohol. So she had to go through, well, the safety, it fumes, it's flammable. Don't use white vinegar on granite because we have granite countertop in our kitchen. So her risk and safety was very specific to the things that she was using. And then what about stainless steel? We have stainless steel sink. Could she use these stains on granite and stainless steel? So she had to go back and do a little bit. This was all ended up in her background research that she was then able to put into the risk and safety. Now, the next section is your bibliography page. Now, no, not bibliography, data analysis. So your data analysis page, what you're really saying is you're just describing the procedures or the method that you're going to use to analyze your data and results. I simply said, we're going to record it in a data table. We're going to measure how many milliliters of water was squeezed out from each paper towel. And I made a data table, kind of what we're going to use in class. So for each of our 5 trials and then each of our 5 types of paper towels, we've got our data table. And then you don't have to do this, but at the end I said, we will use a bar graph to show the average absorbency for each paper towel. The reality is this right here is what's going to be on my display board. I'm not going to put this. I'm going to put this. I want something that's going to be easy to see the results of. So I wanted to make sure I had just put that for the kids so that they realize there are multiple ways for you to display your data. You need to collect your data, but then you're going to want to display your data. And the last section I don't even have in my book yet is my bibliography. So I'm going to be honest about bibliographies. When I am working on my background research for our class and we're together, everything is online, almost. So because of that, I'm going to get my computer up for a second here. I actually created a rough draft bibliography form. So I already have it on my computer. What I literally am going to do is print this out, and then I'm going to just staple it in to my lab journal. Because so many of my resources are online resources, it's just easier to do it that way. Now, I did want to show one thing on here. One of the things we talked about today is anything can be used as a resource for a background resource, and anything you use needs to be used on your bibliography, which includes things like my Bounty paper towel roll. So we had laughed in class, like, how on earth do you put this in your background research? Well, I found it. So in a resource I found online, it talks about it, and it says you can even use things like paper towel roll, or no, they didn't say that. I said that. Products and wrappers. What you do is you're basically answering the question, who, when, what, and where. So who, this paper towel was made by Georgia Pacific Consumer Products. When, 2021. What, it's a brawny paper towel packaging. Where, it's made in Atlanta, Georgia. And I have my APA citation for a paper towel package. It's crazy. So we use 3 packages that we got information off of. And so I put those 3 packages in our bibliography. All right. Now, one of the reasons why I go ahead and I make this rough draft bibliography is now that I have all of this information through the data analysis method, I am going to now go back and I'm going to make sure that I have it in my computer as my plan. So everything that's in my journal, I have in here. I've got my research problem. It's exactly what it is in my lab journal. My research question is exactly what it is in my lab journal. My background research, I took I think it was 8 pages of background research, and I condensed it into 5 paragraphs, maybe 4. It gives the history. So basically what I did was the history of paper towels, how paper towels absorb, like what the absorption is, why some paper towels absorb differently than others. And then I did just a 1 or 2 sentence about each of the paper towels that we specifically are going to be researching. So that's really what I did. It's a big overall picture, and then slowly, like, what's absorption, how are paper towels made, And then what do we know about these paper towels? These were the questions I asked when we were asking questions back in the research question. Then we get to our hypothesis, which is the same, and then we get to procedures. I literally took my procedures, turned it somewhat into my outline form, put them in there, added my materials, added my risk and safety. Now, in risk and safety, in my lab journal, I have risk and safety listed as like by number. And what I did when I took my risk and safety and I put it into my my plan, I actually just wrote it in as a paragraph, because all I'm really doing is telling you the information. So it's exactly what I wrote in my journal, only it's just as a paragraph instead of as a numbered list. And then the last thing is the data analysis method. If you notice, I did not draw that label or that data table. I just told what I was going to do. I'm going to record the data in a table in my journal. It'll allow comparison of how many milliliters of water was squeezed out. All 5 trials will be recorded. I'll take the average amount of absorbed water to create a bar graph. Super simple and super easy. And then the last thing I did was I cut and paste my bibliography, and I put it in here, made sure it was all APA format, and let it go. Now, while we're talking about that, in here in your guide, just remember when it talks about background research, it has these questions. Over on the side, it says, give a summary of your background research. So they really want you to do a couple of paragraphs explaining what the important information that you found was. The same goes for, let's see, I think it's for the data analysis. Over on the side, it just tells you to describe it. Risk and safety, just identify any. So it doesn't have to be a really big deal. You're just writing a few sentences to explain these things. And then your bibliography. Now, at this point in time, right here where we finished, you are done until you complete your experiment. So everything after this is post-experiment. Right now, I am completely set up in my lab journal to do my experiment. I have gotten through my data analysis method. I need to put in my bibliography. Once my there's my spot for my bibliography. Once my bibliography is in there, the next thing that I will do will actually be to record my experiment. So we're not doing that today. We are going to stop after bibliography. I hope that helps. I will say, don't forget, you do have just a real simple explanation as to what these things are. And I tell my kids to come back to this all the time. Everything you need to know really is in here. Then when you get to your science fair judges form, it's going to give you everything you need to know to assess it. Now, I will tell you this is a change from last year to this year, is that in previous years, this arrangement next to it where this says research paper and this says lab journal, next to the scientific method, it used to say research plan. So when new directors hear old directors talk about the plan being on the judges form and you're wondering where, it's because this is the first year it has not been on here, but it used to say research plan right here. So in my mind, it's still on there that you've got your journal, your plan, your paper, your board, and your presentation. So you have all 5 canons of rhetoric that are on display during the science fair. All right, I hope that helps. Please let me know if you have any questions. Have a great weekend.